So Susan is going to give a 5 to 7 minute speech today. She's working on the persuasive influence path on pathways. And this speech is about inspiring your audience. Susan is constantly curious person. I think we've all noticed that. And she was recently inspired to learn more about the loneliness epidemic after attending a TEDx Marin presentation. After all, unlike many things in our lives, loneliness is something we might be able to change. So Susan's speech tonight is named, it's titled, The Loneliness Epidemic and How Mini Connections Can Spark Your Life. Please welcome Susan.
I recently read a quote from our U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Murphy, that loneliness is an epidemic and it's as harmful to human beings as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That shocked me, having been a former smoker, but it inspired me to find out more about how he came to this conclusion. It turns out that Dr. Murphy actually wrote a book called The Loneliness Epidemic. And in the book, he claims that loneliness is actually a public health concern, as concerning as the other crises and epidemics that we're addressing today, such as addiction to drugs and alcohol, obesity, depression, anxiety, violence, and anger. I found that very thought-capturing. Loneliness is not just a bad feeling. It's really bad for you. There is evidence that it relates to heart disease, anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's, and a premature death. Loneliness is nothing to joke about. And how did we get here? How did we get to this state of loneliness? Because just last year, 44 million people in a survey reported that they had felt lonely and loneliness more than usual in the past 3 months. That's a large swath of the United States population. And you might expect that there are some groups that would actually experience loneliness more than others at some times. One of those is an older American adult demographic, where a person may be experiencing loss of a loved one, loss of a career, loss of a home, loss of many things that they relied on. And then there's the 18 to 24-year-old group that actually is still developing. Lots of information out there about that. They're still really developing and finding themselves. So loneliness can be detrimental to them. But in between, I believe that many of us experience loneliness, but we don't really like to talk about it. We try to find ways to cover it up rather than really saying anything about it. But have you ever experienced loneliness in the middle of a crowd? For example, if you worked in an office, it's a Thursday afternoon, everyone is scurrying around going to a meeting, and you're going too, but you feel completely detached from the whole thing and isolated, like none of it really matters. Why? Because our connections are not deep enough. They really don't mean what they should. As a society, years ago, we were born into families, large families and communities and bonds. We relied on each other, protected each other, grew and learned from each other. But our society has changed in many hundreds of years. We aren't really necessarily that kind of society anymore, at least not in the United States. We don't live in extended families. We have to work to be connected, and it matters. So what are some of the things that are contributing to this loneliness? Well, I can think of several, and I'm not going to deal with the prescriptions that are often given for loneliness, which are very, very helpful. And let me just mention them for a minute. Of course, you hear things like join a group, take a painting class, join a hiking group, make sure you have dinner with your friends once a week. find all kinds of ways to reach out, and all of that is really effective. We should do that. But on a micro level, there are things that are affecting us every day. Amanda mentioned this, our dependence on social media and social devices. My phone reminds me every day how many hours I have spent creating or perfecting my online presence that I could have spent connecting with real people. And then we had a pandemic in the last few years, which completely squashed all of our social opportunities, stopped them dead for a year to a year and a half, even more. Work opportunities changed completely. There was no more commuting by plane, train, boat, or any other way. Nothing. There were no offices to go into. They were all closed. And now that the pandemic is over, our topic of conversation now is, should we go back to an office? Is it mandatory? Should it be hybrid? Or should we allow people to work alone, on their own, tuned into a team on Zoom? Someday, and soon, we'll have more information, we'll have more ideas, but it changed our lives. I also think that beneath it all, rejection is the number one fear that keeps us lonely. It keeps us from reaching out, because what if the other person doesn't appreciate our attention or our advances? But there's some interesting research going on right now by a professor at UC Berkeley that has shown that the fear of rejection can be overrated. That often people report they're really happy that you chose them to talk to speak to. They have things going on too, and you can't possibly know what that is. So one of the things that I've adapted this year that I'm very proud of is a way to reach out and make mini connections that spark my life, that at the end of the day make me feel a little more fulfilled. And I'll give you just a couple of quick stories. And I'm talking about connecting with people all around you, strangers. Imagine yourself in Nordstrom Rack. You have purchases to check out. There's a long line of people. The woman next to you has on an adorable pair of shoes. Why don't you compliment her? Ask her a question. Start a conversation. Where did she get them? Or you're getting your coffee at Pete's or Starbucks. Why not start a conversation with that lovely barista and find out, hey, how did you get into this job? What's your favorite blend? Anything that just makes you feel like for one moment you knew somebody more than just please and thank you. A couple of short stories, and one of these Pia will relate to. She and I went out to lunch one day at a Marin restaurant, Gott's, and there were some elderly gentlemen, many of them on walkers, and they couldn't seem to get settled. They were all frustrated, and I finally got up and I thought, so I asked the gentleman, can I help in any way? And he said, well, we come here as a group of 12, we're Lions Club members. We come every month, and this is our table over here, but someone's sitting there, so we don't know what to do. And I said, okay, well, let me just wander over there. And I did. And within 10 words, these lovely young people said, of course, we'll move, have them come over. So everybody has lunch, everybody gathers, everybody's happy. And when Pia and I are ready to leave, I walk over to him and just say goodbye. And he thanks me profusely and digs into his bag and pulls out a little beaded bracelet for my arm. Don't know where it came from. And it's not the bracelet that matters. But I'm telling you, I never felt so good that day. I have many, many stories like this because I've been doing this all over recently this year. I know, Barbara, thank you. It's the feeling that you may never change the world. You won't probably change the world, but you might change someone's feelings for a few minutes or a day. And I encourage you, I challenge you to go out and find some ways to connect many connections and see how that spark feels to you. See if it makes a difference, because I think it will. Thank you.